I'm very grateful to be here today. I would like to raise my hands to the Nutsamot Tribal Council for hosting this. My name is Nicole Norris, and I am the First Nations Partnership Coordinator for Emergency Management BC. I'm also a co-facilitator for Cultural Safety and Humility. And I would like to pass the floor over to my colleague, Heichka.
Sorry, do you want to jump in there, Samantha?
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm just going to quickly introduce myself. My name is Samantha, and I'll be the tech host for this session. We have some other people here who are taking notes as well as recording the session so that we can put them on the CCP Workshop YouTube channel. These recordings are going to be available publicly, so that if anyone can't join us today or if they're in another session, that they can access the content on the YouTube channel. The recorder will be arranging their own computer screen so that only the interpreters and the presenters will be visible, but there is the potential that your video will show up in the recording. So just as a precaution, we remind you that you can turn off your video in the bottom left corner. And if you don't want your voice to be recorded either, then you're welcome to participate through the chat, and we'll make sure that these are read out during the session. If you have any questions about this, please don't hesitate to contact Laura at ccpworkshop@notsamot.com. So I think that we've already begun recording, so I'll pass it back to the speakers to begin. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Samantha. Well, thanks for introducing yourself there, Nicole. So my name is Jameson Mailloux. I also work with the Disaster Risk Reduction and Planning branch of Emergency Management BC. I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge and recognize that I'm phoning in from the traditional territory and ancestral homeland of the Lekwungen speaking peoples, the Esquimalt and Songhees nations. Thank you. So a few of the topics that we're going to be diving in today are related to emergency management and how to incorporate some of that into comprehensive community planning. Some of the goals and objectives are to identify some tangible, practical actions, not only at the community, but also at the personal level or households, where there's a few simple items or tasks, activities that can be put into practice to help prepare, reduce some anxiety that may come out of an emergency incident. And we're also really hoping that there'll be some interaction between ourselves and the other individuals participating. So this isn't just a download of Emergency Management BC policy or corporate objectives, but it is a two-way conversation. Particularly interested in hearing from communities and Indigenous governments, what's working for them, where some gaps may exist. And we'll also be sharing some of the resources available through EMBC that can help promote, strengthen, and empower one another in being successful, however each community has identified that they would like their goals or objectives to move forward. And then we'll discuss some ways to introduce and incorporate emergency management, either through updating existing or drafting new comprehensive community plans. So I'll switch the slide here. Hope this works. Can everyone see slide 2?
Yes.
Super. All right, so a brief overview of what we're hoping to discuss today is some outreach and networking, personal preparedness, regional evacuation and lodging plans, community planning tools available, some training opportunities and financial supports, followed by a question and discussion period at the end of today's call if any of the participants have further interests. All right, outreach and networking. Nicole, do you want to start this one off for us?
Sure. So one of the key things to creating a great emergency preparedness plan and incorporating that into your comprehensive community plan is by doing some outreach and networking from community to community. So from nation to nation, but also nation to regional districts and service providers, and then also government to government. On the bottom, you can see our contact information that is available for anybody that may have further questions afterwards.
Yeah, please reach out if there's anything either myself or Nicole can do, anything related to what we're discussing or presenting on today, or anything that you find any burning questions or something's not quite clear, please just pick up the phone or write me an email. I'm happy to converse one-on-one. All right, personal preparedness. So we're going to go over a few items that can help reduce anxiety and better prepare individuals if an emergency incident does occur. So I guess this is a question for everyone on the call. Have you ever thought about how to prepare for an emergency? Particularly how you would prepare your household for 3 to 7 days without electricity or running potable water. How would you cope if you had to evacuate your home on short notice? How would you go about contacting family and receiving information during an emergency? So I'm curious if anyone on the call has ever thought about these items or have gone a step further into actually preparing some sort of plan in the event that something did occur. So again, there's no right or wrong answers here. We'll be kind of elaborating and going over these a bit more throughout the presentation. All right, so it's new. Excellent. So we're going to dive into a few of the actual practical tasks or activities that one could do to better prepare themselves. All right, so personal preparedness, there's essentially 3 steps. So knowing your hazards, making your plan, and gathering supplies. So pretty straightforward there. Do you want to take this one, Nicole?
Sure. So as we have a grand scope across the territories, knowing your hazards for your community and even your own personal environment, your home and your yard, is key and essential in knowing what to prepare for and how to gather your supplies.
Yeah, so say communities in the interior probably a little bit more prone to wildfire, whereas communities closer to the coast probably more aware or potentially impacted by earthquakes, tsunamis, windstorms and downfall, that sort of thing. So these are the top 10 hazards in BC. Again, the ones most important for your communities will probably be dependent on where exactly you live geographically in the province. A few examples of hazards. So the floods that took place in 2018, we had severe flooding in Grand Forks. A number of Indigenous communities were impacted. Again, we had a very pretty dramatic wildfire season again this year where a lot of communities were impacted. So being prepared will help reduce anxiety in communities, promote a feeling of togetherness, and just help everyone, I guess, a cohesive feeling of that community resilience. Again, disease outbreaks, something very burned in people's minds at this point in time with the COVID pandemic. Does anyone on the call want to share with us any of the the hazards that have impacted them over the last number of years? Are there any stories that anyone wishes to share? How about you, Nicole? Do you have any stories for us?
I do have a story. So it was actually headline news back in February of 2020. My village of Khalalt flooded. There was a man-made dike that was created by the former family that owns the what is known as the Red Rooster, the farms up there. Back in the early 50s, the former owner had dropped chunks of concrete to create a dam to help with watering some of his fields. And with the significant rainfall in the early mornings of February 1st in 2020, my beloved family and my community woke up to several feet of water. My own personal family home had 6 feet of water in the basement coming up. A lot of damage. At the time, the fire department had come in and had evacuated the south side of our village, and so there was about 4 or 5 families that were evacuated to Duncan, and the rest of them were evacuated to Ladysmith. I, being the one person that had the most emergency management training, was tasked with stepping up to the plate to ensure that they had declared a state of emergency, that they had ESS services, cultural support services, of course. First Nations Health Authority stepped up in a really big way to support us, and Nanaimo ESS. The couple years prior to that, we had a very significant wind event where we were without power for a number of days, which brought about massive loss in regards to food, and all the fridges and freezers were out, so all the food fish went, all of our game went, and having to figure out the best clean drinking water options when there's no power. Those 2 events in particularly really projected the opportunity to have a look at some of the other hazards that could possibly affect us and how we could prepare for that. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for sharing, Nicole. And I see also Shirley Pat mentioned wildfires this year was something that she was definitely impacted by this year. I think most British Columbians climate change seems to be seeping into more of our weather and climatic conditions. Is just something that's continually being raised. So step 2, so once we know all of our hazards, we have an opportunity to start to plan for how to mitigate, prepare, and hopefully avoid the hazards. So how do we go about doing that? So the next step would be to make an emergency plan to prepare for these hazards. So the emergency plan is sort of a playbook, how you and your household or community will respond to a disaster. So knowing what to do will greatly reduce anxiety, help keep you focused and safe. Everyone's kind of on the same play, if you could say that. So everyone has, they know what they should be doing at this time. They've practiced it, hopefully. So through some of the following slides, we'll go through some considerations that one might want to include in their plan. There's also a downloadable fill-in-the-blank template from the Prepared BC website. So you could also pick up a hard copy of this document, so a template that will help you navigate exactly what some of the items or activities that we're recommending you to be aware of from your regional office. So there's a hard copy there as well if you don't have access to a computer. So step 2, preparing your plan. So how will you communicate? Know where to find information, and how are we planning for vulnerable persons? Nicole, do you want to start us off here? You want me to get into it?
Oh, no, you can go ahead.
All right. So what I like to think about is the how and the where. So being able to communicate is vital during an emergency. Often what's greatly helpful is to save or write a list of names of people you can call for help during an emergency. One of the best practices is ideally to have one contact living far away so they won't be affected by the same disaster or emergency, and have one who lives in your community. So having those two pieces will help kind of generate what's termed situational awareness, or what exactly is taking place and how are you being impacted, and how can you best avoid, mitigate, or prepare for reducing the impacts of the event. So that there's the how. So how will you communicate? So being prepared beforehand will greatly help you in that situation. And then where? To make good decisions during emergency, you need good information. So Emergency Management BC recommends starting with local sources, finding out how they'll share information. Will this be through a website, social media, through a phone number that you can call where there's a loop recording that'll provide you with information about where you should be going or what the implications are of the event taking place, through local radio stations. So depending on the emergency, you can also check into provincial channels for information. So online at emergencyinfobc.ca. There's also a Twitter feed that's kept up to date at Emergency Info BC. So that these links will also be shared in the Slack program, as well as the Zoom chat after our presentation. And one of the other big pieces is planning for more vulnerable persons. So a consideration around school-age children. Do you need a plan for the possibility that they might be in school when an emergency occurs? Do you know your school's emergency policies, how they will be reaching out to the parents or other loved ones that are helping, supporting, and caring for those younger age children's? Is there a designated person to pick up your children if you're unable to do so? So having all of these pieces prepared beforehand will really help in reducing some of the anxiety that can come, a lot of the stressors. Everyone has an idea of what they should be doing, and it helps create a flow of positive activities that will help manage the situation. And then saving and writing down the contact info for your school where your children attend could be incredibly helpful. Are there special considerations for elders in your community or persons with disabilities or mobility issues? These are all just pieces that I wanted to raise in order to help kind of build an awareness that there are a number of pieces to be aware of. Is there anything you wanted to add, Nicole?
The piece around the elders is very important. I remember when we evacuated some of our elders, some of the considerations that we had to be conscious of was medication and snacks for our diabetic members, and then also our slower moving elders that maybe needed mobility aids, and how to make sure that they got out safely and were transported safely, so that when they arrived at their lodging location that they came in undamaged. Mm-hmm. So those things are very very important. I remember a lot of information coming out of the Lytton fire this year around elders and some of the challenges that they experienced. And so thinking about having a grander perspective on homes and how to get elders out of their homes, making sure that the walkways going towards the exit are clear, and that the stairs, that in case there needs to be emergency responders for that, some of that assistance, that the stairs are in good order and the yard is easily identifiable, those kinds of things. So there's so many details involved in making sure that your vulnerable persons are taken care of.
Yeah, I think this slide builds on that a little bit. So saving your health or identification information, potentially having a photocopy or just taking a picture with your phone could be incredibly helpful. Medications, medical equipment, these are all different considerations. Do you have a ready grab bag with maybe an extra week supply of medication? And again, just building on what Nicole said, do you have a emergency plan for your house? If you live in an apartment or condominium, are you aware of the building map and all of your available exits? Are there escape routes from your neighborhood in case you need to evacuate quite quickly? Do you have access, or have you written down contact information of utility companies or landlords, or where to find your utilities and how to shut them off safely? And then where are you going after this? So during an emergency, for example, a flood, it's important to gather with the people you live with in order to make sure everyone's safe. So is there a particular individual who's kind of in charge of ensuring a number of the aspects of your emergency plan are being carried forward? So in many circumstances, not everyone part of the household will probably be together when a disaster strikes. So does everyone understand, will they be meeting up and how they're communicating with one another? Maybe one individual doesn't have a cell phone. Do they know that a meeting point, for example, is in a safe location within the community to meet up with all of your family members, and then as a team or unit, you move to safer area? And then building on it, again, what Nicole mentioned, is your dwelling, like, is it conducive, or are there different small little things that you can help to create a smoother emergency exit? So are there railings in place, or if individuals need if there's mobility issues, is there potentially wheelchair access for moving people out of areas where they could be impacted? Yeah, potentially using a library or a community building to meet up with everyone prior to moving. These are just all different considerations that could be a part of your personal preparedness or household emergency preparedness plan. So number 3 is building your kit. So this is probably my favorite step, because you can start to put in pieces or equipment in there. I like to open up mine every year. My wife and I live in a Esquimalt here, and I think if a tsunami hit, we would be in trouble rather quickly. So we've got a couple of emergency or grab bags where we have some food, some water. We've got a wireless radio that we can crank up. So once we have our plan in place, it's time to move on to the final step to preparedness, which is building your kit. So having the right supplies on hand will help give you peace of mind, safety, and comfort if an emergency situation does arise. So you're already prepared for this to take place. So there's 2 types of kits. The first being a household emergency kit for sheltering in place. If you're being recommended or advised to stay in your current location, and a smaller grab and go bag you can take with you in case you need to evacuate on short notice. So one's kind of a stationary or bag or larger kit that stays in your home, and another one's a smaller potential backpack that you could throw in your vehicle and leave with rather quickly. So a household emergency kit should contain enough supplies for about 3 to 7 days. So just about a week to keep everyone safe and comfortable until you can leave your home. So scenarios where a kit could come in handy include earthquakes, disease outbreaks, severe weather storms, power outages, and hazardous material spills. Nicole, do you have any any pieces of your grab and go bag you'd like to share?
I do. I often say to my community that emergency preparedness begins with you. And knowing myself so very well, I always strive for the greatest amount of comfort. I like to keep myself in a state of calm oasis. And so my grab and go bag is much different than some of my, like my children's bags now that they're adults. And of course, medication and identification is super important. Often, if we're in a frenzy and we run out the door, we may be running out the door without our keys. And so having an extra set of keys in my go bag is important. Also knowing that I probably will leave my cell phone behind. So making sure that I have a small envelope with extra identification. More specifically, my care card is really important, and ensuring that I have an extra set of medication, but also other things that will keep me going over the course of a handful of days. Extra clothes, snacks, of course, and I have some hot pockets for in case it's cold. My children, they seem to have some different, they have different things in their go bag. My daughter's got a sewing kit in hers. My son has got a grooming kit, just in case. You never know when you need a pair of, tweezers or nail clippers and stuff like that. And so collectively as a family unit, because each of our bags has distinctly something different, that we could collectively be together and still have a lot of those, what I call creature comforts.
Yeah, something that I always throw in mine is I ensure that I have a bunch of extra lighters in there, maybe some of the fuels that you can light rather easily if you're in potentially a rainstorm. What else do I have in there? A first aid kit, a compass, usually a waterproof map of the area in case, say, all of the cell phone coverage and I'm no longer able to use the GPS on my phone. So understanding where I am, where to go. Yeah, all great things. So next we're going to touch on regional evacuation and lodging plans. So Nicole, you've got a lot of experience in this aspect. Would you like
I
to
do.
lead
So
us off on this one?
absolutely. So earlier in the beginning of our talk, we talked about networking and outreach. And often the nations will have service agreements with their regional districts for services like fire trucks and ambulances. And one of the things that I always talk about is, what do we do if the road coming into our community is blocked off and the fire department can't come or the ambulance can't come, and we can't find a safe way out? So knowing where your point of location to go is really important. One of the things that I had also engaged in from a nation's perspective was about communicating with our sister nations and knowing about some of the things that they were planning for. Right next door to my own nation is a satellite community, and they only have houses, and we're the only ones with a common community building. And so thinking about how do we keep everybody comfortable. And I was talking about doing a blanket drive. We often have lots of blankets, and I'm sure that there's some that we could part with. Myself, I donated 25 blankets towards our blanket drive, and thinking more on a community level on that if we had to bring everybody, say, to the gymnasium or to the health center, how would we keep them comfortable, even just if they had to be there for a few hours? Also holding hands with sister communities. Some of the other communities that are bigger have more options for lodging plans, but also making sure that you're communicating with your emergency preparedness person at your regional district and knowing about what their plans are. That if you're evacuated out of your community and they are receiving you, it's always good to know where you're going. And then also tabletop exercises, practicing some of these things. Much as we do everything else in life, all the things that we prepare for, we always practice to make sure that we've got it down right. You know, jumping into the person in your community or on your side of the street who's going to be the lead on the phone tree, and who's going to make the calls and find out the information, and who's going to coordinate you know, the communications between the families and where you're going. You know, and as you go through some of these instances in real life, then you can further plan out from that point so that you can identify what worked really well, and you also get to really see people for their strengths and how they, you know, how they really stepped up to the plate, and you know, maybe where they could be best suited in a family emergency team or a community emergency team. Yeah.
Yeah, very great points. Maybe Jane is really good at using her mom voice and getting everyone really put in the right places. I've also heard of some communities utilizing this opportunity to have a community wide meal with everyone. So making it fun, making it informative, having some sort of game for the children to be playing. It just helps reduce anxiety, generate a feeling of community togetherness. If an emergency event does occur, you've practiced, you're prepared, you just feel a lot more confident. And then we get into some of the tools available through Emergency Management BC. So these are more at the community level. Please reach out directly to myself or Nicole to discuss these in greater detail. They can be a bit overwhelming when you look at them initially for the first time. Happy to have one-on-ones with anyone participating on today's call to gain a better understanding of how they can be useful for your particular community. Again, every community is going to know exactly what's best for them, very much community driven. In accordance with your larger comprehensive community plan. So how does emergency management fit into your community plan? What your short-term and long-term goals are for your community? So these are some of the community planning tools available through Emergency Management BC, just to help create a bit of a framework in order for you to facilitate or start moving forward on a few of the items that your particular community has identified. So the HRBA tool is a great tool on the EMBC website that can help you identify what some of the hazards are and the probability of those actually occurring, and then prioritizing what some best management practices you could potentially put in place to help mitigate or prepare for that. There's also an emergency management planning toolkit also available online. Community emergency program review. So these are quite new to me as I'm a new member at Emergency Management BC. So please reach out directly to me and we can learn more about them together. I'd be incredibly happy to do that. Anything to add on this slide, Nicole?
One of the things that I think is really important about incorporating your emergency preparedness plan through your comprehensive community plan is that you really have the ability to see what are the most valuable pieces to protect during an emergency. Yes, the children, yes, the lives, yes, the elders, but also what about looking at it through a cultural lens? One of the things that we in Halalt experienced that was quite shocking because we didn't think about it beforehand was the loss of regalia. A lot of our paddle jackets, and we have a lot of huayhuay dancers there. And so when I'm discussing some of these things with some of the nations along the coast, thinking that we want to make plans for keeping some of those things safe as well.
Yeah, thank you for that, Nicole. I think that's incredibly important. I see we just got a 50-second notice. So here's some of the training opportunities and financial supports available across the province for communities. how many do we have here? 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 13. So I've hyperlinked. Oh, sorry, you're not looking at the same slide as me. There we go. So these are a number of the training and program opportunities to help propel your community into or provide supports or frameworks in order to help move forward on some of these aspects. So I did hyperlink these, and I'm hopeful that the PDF hasn't lost that interactiveness. So this